reality check. Well, now, a few moments ago, the two sides drew lots to decide who would start the debate. The Leave side won, and they've chosen Gisela Stuart briefly to summarize their argument. Gisela Stuart.
Ask yourself just one question. If we were not in the EU today, would we join it? And if the answer is no, then on Thursday you will vote leave and take control. The European Union was a noble dream in the last century, but today it has failed. It has turned into a nightmare. I'm a mother and I'm a grandmother, and I think it is terrible that 50% of young people in Greece don't have a job. The only continent with a growth rate lower than Europe is Antarctica. By being in the EU, we lose control of billions of pounds every year. It doesn't have to be like this. We can take back control over our laws. We can take back control over our taxes. We can take back control over our borders, immigration policy, and security. You know, sometimes voting doesn't make much difference. On Thursday, it really does. You will decide who makes decisions about the future of this country. So take back control and vote leave.
Thank you, Gisela. And now to open the debate for the Remain side, their choice, Sadiq Khan.
Good evening. In just 2 days' time, we will make the most important decision for a generation. Tonight, Ruth, Francis and I will set out the positive and patriotic choice to remain in Europe. You and your family will be both better off and safer. Your job will be more secure and your wages will be higher. The prices you pay in the shops will be lower and your rights at work will be protected. As a lawyer, I learned to listen to the experts and follow the evidence. Well, the evidence is undeniable and all the experts agree. We are stronger, safer and better off in Europe. Even those who want us to leave admit that it's a big gamble. And if there's one thing you should remember when you go to vote, it's this. If we as a country decide to quit, then we're out for good. There's no going back. Being outwards and looking and forming alliances is what makes our country so great. So I urge you to make the positive and patriotic choice and vote Remain.
Thank you. Thank you, Sadiq. Now, the questions that we've picked for debate tonight come from our huge audience. Obviously, they can't all ask a question, but we've divided the questions up into 3 sections: the economy, immigration, and Britain's place in the world. And the key issues, those 3 key issues are what we're doing. But what we want to do first, before we go to the questions, is to try and give you an objective view of the issues that are at stake. So let's have a look at the issues that both sides have identified on the economy.
The UK economy is the 5th largest in the world and the 2nd largest in the European Union after Germany. Exports to countries in the EU account for 44% of everything we sell abroad. Last year, we exported goods and services worth £223 billion to the EU and £288 billion to the rest of the world. Imports from the EU amounted to £291 billion, which means we have a trade deficit of £68 billion a year with the EU. All this trade takes place within the EU's single market. That means there are no tariffs on goods moving between EU countries. Leave campaigners say that would also be possible under future trade deals if we vote to leave. The single market also means a common set of rules and standards for almost all goods and many services, rules that are enforced by the European Court of Justice. Remain supporters say that makes it harder for other countries to discriminate against British companies and that being in the single market is good for jobs. Leave supporters say it means all British firms are bound by EU regulations, which add unnecessary red tape and are often imposed without UK support. So when it comes to the economy, which is the best path for Britain, to remain or to leave?
So let's go to our first question, which is from Maxine Fothergill, a Leave supporter. Maxine.
I run a small business employing 10 local staff and have been stifled by the raft of EU legislation that's been imposed on me. What benefits are there for small business owners of remaining in the EU, as I can't see any?
Ruth Davidson.
Well, thank you, Maxine. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy, and I know that some people can find the EU a bit frustrating and fussy, but what it does, it provides a level playing field so that you can't be undercut by other companies in other parts of the world. That's why 8 out of 10 of the CBI's small business members want to stay in the EU. We also help to write those rules, and if we came out of the EU, we wouldn't have a seat at the table. And if we wanted to trade in the EU, the other countries could put on tariffs and taxes, so you couldn't sell to all of these other nations, the biggest free trading bloc in the world, for free. It would cost us more money. That would hurt our economy. It would also hurt jobs in this country. I want our economy to grow and not shrink. And the other side haven't told us what would replace the single market. They haven't told us how many jobs would be lost. They haven't told us how long new trade deals would take. They haven't told us how big the hit would be. I don't think that's good enough when you're going to vote on Thursday. You have to know or don't go. Vote to remain to the biggest trade deal that we can get in the world.
All right. I'm going to try and give equal time to both sides tonight. Boris.
Thank you very much. And I must say that I think it was extraordinary to hear that we would have tariffs imposed on us, because everybody knows that this country receives about a fifth of Germany's entire car manufacturing output. 820,000 vehicles a year. Do you seriously suppose that they are going to be so insane as to allow tariffs to be imposed between Britain and Germany? I've been listening to businesses large and small up and down our country over the last few months, and I've been amazed how many passionately want to come out of the single market because of the rules and regulations that it imposes on 100% of UK businesses, even though only 6% actually do any trade with the rest of the EU. And I'm listening to some of the most extraordinary success stories of UK manufacturing. JCB, the makers of the fantastic diggers that are building this city, building roads and cities around the world. And they want to come out of the EU, and not just JCB, but James Dyson, who is the single biggest manufacturer of vacuum cleaners in Germany.
All right, Boris.
In Germany. And he wants to come out. And I can just let me finish this point. He wants to, and he's telling the papers tonight that he thinks staying in would be an act of economic self-harm.
All right.
And the way to more wealth and more jobs is to leave the EU, vote leave, and take control on Thursday.
Boris, I'm really pleased you're speaking to people. I hope you're listening too. And one of the people you should listen to... And one of the people you should listen to is a chap called Patrick Minford. You may have heard of him. He's your chief economic advisor. Now, Patrick said, and I quote, "Leaving will eliminate manufacturing." I quote, "Over time, if we left the EU, it seems likely we would most likely eliminate manufacturing, but this shouldn't scare us." Well, let me tell you, Boris, to those 2.5 million who work in manufacturing, it scares them, it scares their family, and it scares me.
Okay, I'm going to go over to you. You want to stay on this? Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I've run financial services businesses for 25 years, and I did a stint as city minister, and I'm a mum, and I genuinely believe our future will be so much brighter if we vote leave and take back control of our trade. The European Union has been a disaster for UK trade with the rest of the world. And it is true to say, if we remain in, we're already one of the biggest contributors to the EU. Their failed Euro project is going to cost us so dearly. We will be paying for it forever. And not only that, the EU wants to expand its borders to include Turkey, and we simply cannot afford it. We need to take back control and vote leave on Thursday.
Francis, just a reminder, Maxine's question was about what benefits there are for small business owners of remaining.
Well, I was going to say that, Maxine, your question is about small businesses, and there are lots of small businesses in Britain that have a pretty tough time, but many of them are also parts of supply chains. And, you know, the Leave side roll out JCB, but that's one company. If all the experts are saying that the economy would take a big hit if we came out of the EU, that we would, trade would be more expensive, investment would drop, that would hit jobs and wages too. And, you know, if you don't believe the experts, then listen to the shop floor, because I'm here representing workers tonight, and union reps from BMW, Toyota, Ford, Nissan, you name it, across the manufacturing sector, they are saying we cannot afford to take this gamble with our jobs, our wages, our livelihoods, and our rights.
Gisela.
Maxine, as someone who runs a small business, you know you haven't got time to lobby in Brussels. That's why the big companies like Brussels, because they're all just lobbying to have their rules imposed. And you are left with having to comply with them. What I find is where the real job generators are the small businesses like yours. And let's just say what will happen after we vote to leave. The In-campaigner, the chair of the In-campaign, Sir Stuart Rose from Marks and Spencer's, he said, it's not going to be a step change or somebody's going to turn the lights out. And then he went off very, very importantly, wages will go up.
Yeah.
Now that should be something that is really very important, because the pressure at the same time of uncontrolled immigration, which is what the Bank of England has said, that with every 10%, you've got a suppression of 2% on wages. So for small businesses, you're better off, take back control and leave.
Do you want to come back on that?
I do. I do. Because let's be honest, workers in this country have already been through a rough time. And that was nothing to do with this debate. That was to do with all those bankers who crashed our economy. And workers ended up paying the price. So when we talk about wages, the TUC has looked at all the hard evidence. And what it shows, what we can see, is that in the long run, because our economy would be hit, good jobs like the ones in BMW and the car factories would be replaced by worse ones like Sports Direct and 0 Hours and Wetherspoons, for that matter.
All right.
Wages would drop in the long run by £38 a week. That's filling up your petrol tank in a small car. That is a big hit. And we can't afford it. Don't take the risk.
All right, Andrea.
Thank you. Francis, what Len McCluskey, who is the boss of Unite Union, the biggest union, has said is that in the last 10 years, the EU's accession plans has created a gigantic experiment at the expense of ordinary workers. The result has been sustained pressure on living standards, a systematic attempt to hold down wages, and to cut costs of social provision for working people. The EU has also created 50% youth unemployment right across southern Europe. It's a total
we have the
disgrace.
highest employment that we've ever had in this country,
for a generation of young people.
All right, Ruth.
Andrea, we're talking about British jobs, and we have the highest level of employment in our country's history. And if you want to trade quotes, let's talk about what your side have been saying. Boris Johnson, His chief economist, he says it will eliminate manufacturing. He also says the EU would generate an economic shock. Michael Gove says it will mean inevitably bumps in the road. He says he can't guarantee that people won't lose their jobs. I cannot guarantee that every person currently in work in their current job will keep their job. Boris Johnson said, will there be job losses? There might or there might not. That is not good enough. That is not good enough.
They are back. I think it's very surprising. It hasn't taken them long.
Boris?
It hasn't taken them long.
How many jobs will go, Boris?
They began by telling us that they were going to have a positive and patriotic case, and they're back to Project Fear within moments of this debate beginning.
Wanting to protect British workers is positive.
They have nothing positive to say, and I just remind everybody.
Hold on, Ruth.
It was Lord Rose.
You'll have your everybody will have their chance, but if you speak, hang on a second. If you speak one at a time, everybody here can hear and everybody at home can hear.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was Lord Rose who said very clearly that there would be no shock, that things would go on as they are, except for one thing. He said that people on low incomes, as Gisela has rightly said, would get a pay rise, and he was supported in that view by somebody on the panel opposite, because it is no less a figure than, I'll leave you to guess. Somebody said that in too many places, immigration has driven down local wages. Now, who do you think that was on the panel opposite? Actually, it was Sadiq Khan, and I think he was making a good point.
Not true.
No, I didn't.
My view, as a conservative, and I'm a proud conservative and a believer in free markets, I think the differentials in income in our country have become too great. And I think it is wrong that FTSE 100 chiefs are now earning 150 times the average pay of people on the shop floor. And it would be a fine thing if, as Lord Rose says, if people on low incomes got a pay rise as a result of us taking back control of our country and our system.
Boris,
ask your question.
I don't think it's unreasonable. People worried about the local hospital, people worried about the local school, worried what would happen if our economy went into recession, or if they lost their jobs, or businesses struggled, because all the experts say, and you know this, that leaving the EU would cause problems for our country. Most recently as today, the chap who predicted the crash in 2008, Nouriel Roubini, what did he say, Boris? He said Brexit could stall the UK economy and tip us into recession. It's not unreasonable for a mum and dad worried about paying the bills to ask the questions, what is your plan? Let me show you this. A slogan is not a detailed plan. We want the answer to the question, what is your plan? How will you make sure the terms of trade with the EU are better than they are now? How will you make sure jobs won't suffer? How will you make sure small business won't suffer? Let me tell you, the last time there was a recession, hard-working people in this country suffered, many lost their homes. And what's important, Boris, is you answer their questions. What is your plan?
All right, a briefish answer, because we've got more questions to come on the economy.
Free trade deal.
You want to answer this?
Free trade deal.
The point is, we are, as things stand, spending billions every year that go into a big black hole in the European Union, and it's going to get worse. All the Remain side have to talk about is Project Fear. We are the 5th biggest economy in the world. We will be able to negotiate free trade once we're free of the European Union that has done a terrible job negotiating free trade for us. Even Switzerland and Singapore, far smaller economies, have been able to negotiate more than 5 times the value of the free trade of the European Union.
All right, everybody. All right, hold it there. Hold it there. No. We have a second question. Thank you very much. We have a second question on the economy, and it's from Miranda Grell, who's supporting Remain. Miranda.
As a black British woman, I am grateful for the protections the EU has provided me in the workplace and in wider society. If we leave the EU, will this be the beginning of a slippery slope towards weaker employment and social rights in the UK?
And Andrea Leadsom.
Well, thank you very much for your question. And the truth is that UK governments have led the way in providing good rights for workers. Even before the European Union came into existence, we had equal pay legislation. It's been governments of all parties that have created minimum wage legislation, now a national living wage, shared parental leave, child-free tax-free childcare, and it's this country that is protecting workers' rights. And we do not need unelected, bureaucratic European leaders who none of us can even name, let alone who any of us voted for, to tell us what our workers' rights can be. We should take back control and look after our own society.
All right. It's a question about employment and social rights. Do you want to start?
It's a really important question from Miranda, because too often we hear the word red tape, and what they're really talking about is getting rid of vital rights at work that we all rely on. Now, these rights weren't gifted to us. We've fought over generations, over borders, trade unions, all of us fought for these rights, but the EU guarantees them. And these are really important to our real lives, and people don't always understand this. This is about, you know, if your child is sick, get an emergency leave to look after them. It's about equal rights for part-timers and agency workers. And, you know, we hear a lot about holidays. Well, when the Working Time Directive came in, 2 million people in Britain got paid holidays for the first time. Mainly women, mainly young people. Do you trust them? Can they promise us today, because I've heard a lot from some of these leading lights in the Leave campaign and what they plan to do on employment rights, can you promise us today that you will protect each and every single right that we want through the EU?
That's the question. Gisela.
You have done already.
I first joined the trade union 45 years ago when I was an apprentice. And I know that strong trade unions, and best supported by Labour governments, actually protect rights. I find it extraordinary that I'm being told that I can't trust you, the voter, to make sure we get a government in which protects workers' rights, and that we need Brussels to defend you. The euro is a broken project. We are going to pay, no, you are going to pay out of your taxes one bailout after another. And the European Union does not protect your jobs. Just a few years ago, Ford Transit actually got money from the European Union so they could take their factory out of the United Kingdom and put it into Turkey. That is wrong.
All right.
More fibs.
Sadiq Khan.
Miranda, I will answer your question, but Gisela, you are so wrong. Every time you and I have been in a lobby voting for bills to give workers rights, they've been in the other lobby voting against those rights. And let me tell you this. Let me tell you why you're wrong. Because Priti Patel let the mask slip. Priti Patel has said, if we could just halve the burdens of the EU social and employment legislation. And let me tell you what that means. That means rights for mums and dads. That means rights for part-time workers who've got the same rights as full-time workers. That means rights for those when the employer changes ownership, they have the rights. Let me tell you what else. The worst thing for workers is their businesses going out of business, them losing trade, losing jobs. And that's why we need a healthy economy. And Gisela, you should know better.
Sadiq, the most important workers' right is a right to a job. And as long as we are shackled to a failing Eurozone, liable to bailout after bailout, we will not succeed.
Well, let me deal with this. There's 2 points. Number one, the Eurozone is growing faster than our economy and the USA. Actually, that's number one. Number two, you and I both fought an election where these guys were boasting how brilliant our economy is. right? They were boasting last year how brilliant our economy is. One of the reasons why we're the 5th richest country is because our role is enhanced by being in the European Union.
All right.
We're at the table helping the rules be made. And you know,
All right, Boris.
In addition, I think it beggars belief. It beggars belief that the Remain side cannot think of a single one of the EU's multitude of regulations that they would get rid of. Not even the clinical trials directive that prevents vital pharmaceutical work from being carried out. The EU is, I'm afraid, a job-destroying engine, and you can see it all across southern Europe, and you can see it. You can see it, alas, in this country as well. Gisela has rightly mentioned the case of Ford. I would also mention what happened to Tate and Lyle, who have just tonight announced that they want to come out of that we should come out of the EU because of the destruction that the EU's common agricultural policy has wrought upon them, not just on jobs in London, but also, of course, on jobs in the developing world who want to export cane sugar to the EU. And I would also, I would mention Tata Steel. We are told that we cannot cut our energy costs to protect jobs in Port Talbot because Brussels says no.
Thank you, Boris. Thank you.
That's absolutely
That's a lie.
Ruth Davidson.
Sorry, David, that's just a lie.
Now, hold on.
totally true.
All right,
One lie
all right,
after
wait,
another
wait,
after another.
All right, just cool it, everybody, for a moment. Ruth Davidson.
It's totally
You're going to be
Just a lie,
asked to
Boris.
vote in 2 days' time, and all you've heard tonight is trust us and it'll all be fine. And that's not good enough. They won't tell us how much our economy will be hit by. They won't tell us how many jobs might go. They won't tell us what they're going to replace a single market with. And I'm sorry, this is something, if you vote on Thursday, you cannot change your mind on Friday. If we vote to come out of the biggest free trade bloc anywhere in the world, there will be tariffs put on British businesses. That will affect our ability to trade abroad. And it's not just the 27 that we trade with now as part of the EU, but there are 50 other countries in the world that the EU has trade deals with. If we come out, they want to do deals with others too. We go to the back of the queue. That's not what we said. That's not Project Fear. That's what Obama said.
All right.
They want to do deals with 500 million people, not 50 million people.
Andrea.
The truth is that 80% of the world's economy is not in the single market. And the free trade deals that Ruth is talking about that the EU has, those free trade deals are most of them, 46 of the 50 countries, are not in the single market. Many countries in the world do more business with the EU than the UK does. You do not need to be in the single market.
So what
we
are you
do
replacing
not
it with?
need that. We are the world's 5th biggest economy.
go on then.
And most economies can agree free trade deals within 2 years. The European Union is taking 10 years or never at all. Why? Because 28 member states cannot even organise a takeaway curry, let alone what they're going to do on free trade with the rest of the world.
All right. The line was we do not need to be in the single market.
Well, look, when you are 5'6", it's not often you say size matters. But size matters because the bigger you are, the more clout you've got. The idea smaller countries can negotiate better deals than the European Union is rubbish. And you know, the reason why we get good deals is because, look, if you are a company in China, in America, in India, and you want to do business with 500 million customers, you can have your headquarters here in London and have a gateway to 500 million customers. If we left the EU, the market would be much smaller. And you know what? And you know what else? Boris, you should know better. Because I speak to businesses around our city every day of the week. And you know what? 500,000 jobs in London directly dependent on the European Union.
No.
I speak to companies from around the world. More than 60% of the world's leading companies, Sony, AIG Insurance, Bloomberg, have their European headquarters. Guess where? Here in London. Half of our exports go to Europe. Boris, why have you suddenly changed your mind?
All right, well,
Can I just come back?
all right. Since we have a former mayor of London and the present mayor of London, perhaps the former mayor would like to answer the present one.
I think we've heard an amazing amount of running down our city and our country over the last...
We're proud of our city. We're
over
proud
the
of our
last few
country.
years. And the astonishing thing, I think, is that they underestimate, the Remain side continually underestimate our ability to do better deals if we're left to do it on our own. And let me give you an example. Because of the EU system, our entire trade negotiating policy is consecrated, is handed over to the EU Commission, where only 3.6% of the officials actually come from our country. And it is no wonder that they have not been, as Andrea rightly says, they have not been able to do essential free trade deals with China, with India, with all the growth
Boris.
economies of the world, including America, including to the
Boris,
extent, to the point where we cannot...
Just one question. One
Ruth,
question.
I'll make one point
please.
to you, Ruth.
One question.
We cannot, because the EU is in charge of our trade negotiations, we
Boris,
cannot
can you name me a
export
single
haggis.
country?
We cannot export haggis to
Come on.
America.
Come on.
All right.
Come on.
All right.
Ruth, tell me.
All right, Boris,
Brussels.
let's leave
Come
the
on,
haggis.
Ruth.
Leave the
It's
haggis
not the
for
Boris
them.
show.
Let me
It's not
go
the
to
Boris
Ruth
show.
briefly, very briefly,
One
because we
question,
want
Boris.
to move on.
Can you name me just one country in the world that has said it will give us a better deal if we come out of the EU?
United
just one
States.
country.
Name one.
Just one country.
United States.
Obama says we go to the back of the queue. Obama says we go to the back of the queue.
All right.
Only
On that
today-
note,
only
the floor of
today
Congress
are
is
you-
very...
on that note, we have to move on. We've got a lot more to talk about. We'll take a pause here. We can cool down. They'll warm up again in just a moment. We go over to Michelle at the other end of the hall here to hear reaction from her guest to the debate so far. Michelle.
That's good.
David, throughout the course of the programme, we're going to be hearing from this panel as well on the key issues. There are 10 of them in all, 5 from the Remain side and 5 from the Leave side. And let's start our economic discussion over here with Priti Patel, Conservative MP and Employment Minister. You're part of a government that asks people to vote for it on the basis of not taking a risk with the economy. How does that square with what you're asking voters to do now?
Well, we've heard from our side this evening very clearly that actually we're the optimists. We have a bright and prosperous and more secure future outside of the European Union, a complete contrast to the Remain side that want to constantly talk Britain down.
If you discount the risk.
Well, we've heard very clearly about the freedom to succeed. We could negotiate new trade deals. And I think it's very pessimistic to hear from the Remain side that they're not even interested in doing that. They don't want new partnerships. They don't want new relationships. They clearly don't want to trade with the 2.2 billion potential customers that exist globally in the Commonwealth countries. And that's about the future of our economy. The future of our...
Before I go to the Remain side, I want to turn to you, Tim Martin, founder and chairman of Wetherspoons. Answer the charge from Francis O'Grady that leaving the EU would roll back workers' rights at a company like yours.
Well, it's complete and utter nonsense. She picked on us for some reason. We pay 40% of our profits as bonuses to staff that work in our pubs.
Okay,
no one gets a fortune. I just should get a chance to reply to that. No one gets a fortune, but apart from John Lewis partnership, so far as I'm aware, no one pays a bigger bonus to their staff.
If
we come out of the EU, we will certainly not abrogate any of our workers' rights. Why would we do that? We paid above what we had to for many years, long before the EU told us what to do.
Okay. Let me get a different perspective from business. This time from Justin King, who ran one of our biggest supermarkets, Sainsbury's, for 10 years. Why do you think we should remain?
Well, I think this is being presented as if it's a straight choice. I think we can have the best of both worlds. We have a place in Europe which is unique and has allowed our country to prosper. And almost everything the Remain camp is saying we ought to do, we can do whilst still part of Europe. 4 of Germany's 8 biggest trading partners are outside of Europe. We are going to see real damage to our economy. That's bad for small business because they're a bellwether of our economy. They'll be the first to lose jobs. We'll see prices go up because our currency is going to be hurt. And a poorer economy means all the services that taxes and a vibrant economy pay for will be harmed.
Okay, you're sitting next to Sarah Wollaston, Conservative MP. until a short time ago, you would have been on the other side of this argument.
But the point is, I've listened to the evidence, and it's absolutely clear that our NHS, our health research, and it will be hit if we leave this, and they'll be hit because there'll be less money for those services, and because it will hit the workforce, and it will hit our leadership role in research and development and cooperation with our European partners. There will be a very serious Brexit penalty for the NHS, make no mistake. And if people are caring about the NHS and research when they make their vote, I would say vote to remain with our European partners.
I'm going to just get a couple of quick thoughts, and I want to turn to Harsimrat Kaur from Women for Britain, but you work for Morrison's. What did you think of what Justin King said about prices would go up if we vote to leave?
So I actually want to focus on the rights, particularly what the Remain side was saying. Actually, we had the first Equal Pay Act by the first female Minister of State, Barbara Castle, 3 years before we joined the European Union. We have the Sex Discrimination Act, the Domestic Violence Act, the Employment Protection Act, and Margaret Thatcher is the first female Prime Minister, all without European Union assistance at all. Are you seriously saying that those rights and those protections are going to just disappear overnight? Of course not.
Okay, just a final thought now from Tim Farron, leader of the Liberal Democrats. You could dismiss the economic arguments as Project Fear.
Well, look, 9 out of 10 experts say that we're better off in the European Union. I know perhaps the quote the whole campaign is Michael Gove saying we've had enough of experts. Well, that's perhaps an explanation of why you're such a dreadful education secretary. When I send my kids... When I send my kids to school, I want them taught by experts, not by the bloke down the pub. And I went to a business in my constituency last Friday, and they are a small business. They're exporting to Romania. They have a contract to provide play equipment over there. That contract is entirely contingent. There's a clause in that contract that if we vote out on Friday, they lose that contract. That's the case for hundreds of businesses across the country.
Tim Farron, thank you very much. More from this panel later on. David, for now, back to you.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, now, the second topic we've dealt with, the economy, is immigration, the second big argument in this whole case. Once again, just before we get our questions and the debate going, a reminder of the key issues that have been identified around the subject of immigration.
508 million people live in the European Union. Freedom of movement means that all EU citizens have the right to live and work in any member state. Last year, net migration from other EU countries, the difference between the number of people coming into the UK and going out, was 184,000. From elsewhere in the world, it was 188,000. The European figure has risen a lot since the EU expanded in 2004. There are now around 3 million citizens of other EU countries living in the UK, and an estimated 1.2 million British citizens living elsewhere in the EU. Because the UK is not a member of the border-free Schengen area, anyone arriving here has to show a passport, and they can be refused entry if they're judged to represent a serious threat to society. Last year, this happened to about 2,000 people from the EU. What about the future? 5 countries have been accepted as candidates for EU membership: Albania, Montenegro, Macedonia, Serbia and Turkey. But current EU states have a veto over any new members. Leave campaigners say staying in the EU means we won't be able to control our borders or the level of immigration. Remain supporters say EU immigration is good for the economy, and planned curbs on in-work benefits will reduce the incentive to move here. So what has been the effect on Britain of EU migration? And is immigration best managed within the EU or outside?
So there's the issue. Our first question is from Jane Williams, who is a Remain supporter. Jane.
My family and I have had first-hand experience recently with the NHS. How would it manage if we left the EU, given the UK's inability to train and retain sufficient doctors and nurses?
Boris Johnson.
Thank you very much. Well, I think the first thing we should do tonight in a discussion about immigration is celebrate immigrants and immigration, everything they do for our country. Because I speak entirely personally, they are my family has benefited massively from immigration, and so I know millions of people watching us tonight. The crucial thing, though, is to look in an informed way at what is going on, look at the numbers, look at the pressure that is large-scale, uncontrolled immigration is causing for public services such as the NHS, and the downwards pressure on wages that I've already mentioned and that Sadiq Khan has discussed, and look at the way in which we are forced by our imbalanced system to push away people who might contribute mightily to our NHS in favour of uncontrolled access to 510 million people from the rest of the EU. What we think should happen is an Australian-style points-based system, so we get the people we need for the NHS and indeed all our other businesses and services.
All right,
and the only way you can do that is to vote leave and take back control on Thursday.
Sadiq Khan.
Well, firstly, Australia has doubled our immigration, bearing in mind their population, so I don't want facts to get in the way, Boris. But, you know, of course we need to have a fair immigration policy. It shouldn't be a free-for-all. And, you know, you won't hear me say this often, but David Cameron deserves credit for the deal he negotiated with the EU. What it means...
What do you say?
What it means is you pay in before you can take out. You've got to work 4 years before you can receive full benefits. But here's the nub of it. Immigration's brought huge economic, cultural and social benefits to our country. And the EU migrants, more than 130,000 work in the NHS and social care, thank you. EU migrants work in our schools and our construction sector, thank you. More than 1.5 million Brits are employed by companies owned by EU citizens here, thank you. And the problem is this, Boris, the problem is this. You might start off with platitudes saying how wonderful immigration is, but your campaign hasn't been Project Fair, it's been Project Hate as far as immigration is concerned.
All right. Calm down. Gisela Stewart.
I am an immigrant.
Sorry,
I am an immigrant. I'm also a mother and a grandmother.
Right.
And I think it is important that as we plan for our public services, like the NHS, like the schools, like housing, that we actually can plan ahead properly. And if we have uncontrolled immigration, with the best will of the world, we will have situations like in the West Midlands where there are 50,000 primary school places missing. This is simply a statement of fact. If you cannot plan, and what I object to, and I think this is really important, the current immigration policy unfairly discriminates against non-EU citizens.
All right, Francis O'Grady.
Well, Jane made a really, really important point in her question about our NHS. And let's not forget, the NHS was built by and for working people, and we should all be really proud of it. But we've got thousands of EU nationals and from all over the world. Nurses, midwives, doctors, other health professionals, the whole health team working to save lives and keep us healthier. We should give them credit where that's due, and we should recognise that there would be a staffing crisis if we lost those staff. There'd be longer waiting lists, fewer life-saving drugs. But David, if I may, I've got a really important question that I just learned about today, because today we learned that Vote Leave took a £600,000 donation MP. Are you going to pay it back?
Well, all right. Well, a brief answer from one of you to that question. Do you know?
Well, you know, that is unworthy of this debate. There are millions of people who have very real and genuine concerns about the impact of free movement on this country and who have donated to a campaign to vote leave and take back control. Now, the problem with free movement, for me as a mum, it's not just about uncontrollable numbers coming here and putting pressure on public services. It's all about security for all of our children, for all of us. Free movement does not allow us to even ask people if they have a criminal record. The European Court has overruled British judges in being able to deport criminals. We know Ron Noble, former head of Interpol, has said that the Schengen-free area in Europe is like hanging out a sign welcoming terrorists to Europe.
I don't want
Free
to
movement
interrupt
is
you, but-
creating enormous problems.
Andrea, I just wanted, just before I go, Andrea, just before I go to the other side, can I remind you of Jane's question? The second half was, how would we manage if we left the EU, given the UK's inability to train and retain doctors and nurses?
We, as Gisela and Boris have quite rightly said, at the moment, uncontrollable immigration from the EU means we discriminate against 92% of the world. There are brilliant health professionals in Southeast Asia, in China, in South America, who would love to come here, but we have to put up the barriers to them because we are required to allow people to come here from the EU, whether or not they're trained to support our health services.
Thank you very much. Ruth.
It is true.
Ruth Davis.
It's not true. Do you know, immigration is hard, and it's really tempting. It's tempting to believe that there's one single silver bullet, like leaving the EU, that can fix it all.
Yes, take back control.
But there isn't.
There is.
We need a proper and credible plan to manage our migration. But they don't have an alternative plan. They're just complaining about what used to be in the past, where you used to be able to come and take out without putting in, and that's changing. They say they want a point system. Migration Watch says that it'll have more people from outside the UK coming to live here rather than less. Boris says he wants an amnesty for illegal immigrants, never mind the legal ones that are coming here. They've had a slogan in this campaign, they've had a poster in this campaign, but they don't have a plan for managing migration, and there isn't a silver bullet.
Okay, Gisela?
No, I just want...
It's up to you.
I just want to respond to some of the, I think, unnecessary invective that we've heard earlier on by pointing out that there's somebody on the panel opposite who said that only a couple of years ago, in the past, we were too quick to dismiss concerns about immigration, even worse, accuse people of prejudice. Now, who do you think that was? It was Sadiq Khan, again. And I agree. I do agree with Sadiq. I think you need a grown-up approach to this, where I'm passionately a believer in immigration, but it's got to be controlled. When you've got numbers running at 330,000 net globally, 184,000 net from the EU, 77,000 coming without even the offer of a job. Last year, it's obviously time to take back control.
All right, Sadiq.
And the answer to your question is to have the Australian-style points-based system.
I think, Boris, all of us accept that there are legitimate concerns about immigration that need to be addressed. The point is, you're not being honest by admitting you've got no silver bullet. And let me say this, you're scaring people to vote to leave the EU, because I'll tell you this, you're telling lies. Turkey is not set to join the EU. Turkey is not set to join the EU. And let me say this. And Boris, you're telling lies and you're scaring people because you have used taxpayers' money to put out an election leaflet that says Turkey's set to join, and there's a map. And this map shows in red Turkey, but the only countries named in this map are Syria and Iraq. That's scaremongering, Boris, and you should be ashamed.
All right, Gisela.
Well done.
Gisela Stewart.
And Boris,
I would quite like the real David Cameron to step forward and tell us what the policy on Turkey is. Because on the one hand, he tells us that it'll be the year 3000, or is it now 30 years? On the other hand, we are spending 1.9 billion of your money to accelerate accession of Turkey. We have got a special section in the embassy to actually deal with speeding up accession. He has just 3 months ago signed a joint statement with all the other heads of governments of the European Union to accelerate accession. And they're currently negotiating visa access of 1 million from Turkey. So, and he refuses to say he will use his veto. So which David Cameron are we like to believe?
All right, Ruth Davidson.
Let me answer on Turkish succession, and let me say this. It is not going to happen. It's just simply not on the cards. Not my words. Boris Johnson said that on LBC Radio 2 months ago. Those were the words of Boris Johnson 2 months ago. What's changed in 2 months, Boris? What's changed in 2 months? It's simply not on the cards.
It's government policy. It's government policy. As far as I know, last time I looked, the government wants to accelerate Turkish membership. I think Gisela posed the dilemma very, very clearly. Is this something they want to happen in the year 3000, or is this something that they wish to accelerate?
All right, Sadiq.
And I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask people whether they would rather proceed on the basis of government promises on immigration, or whether they would rather take back control and institute a points-based system so that the electorate could actually hold the government to account.
Sadiq.
But there's a problem at the moment. The problem at the moment...
Boris. I'm trying to make a balance between the two sides.
I was asked a question. Forgive me.
I know. But when you talk at length, then I have to go...
Forgive me.
Thank you. Sadiq.
But let's deal with this big fat lie once and for all. Turkey isn't about to join. And until 3 months ago, you knew that was the case, Boris Johnson, because look, in 1987, Turkey first applied to join. There are 35 conditions or chapters.
Actually.
There are 35 chapters or criteria.
Allow him to have his say.
Of the 35 chapters, only one has been met. At this rate, it will take the year 3000 before they reach the criteria. And this is the point, Boris. You are using the ruse of Turkey to scare people to vote to leave. And you and I both know there's no chance of them joining soon.
No, I'm a Turk.
Okay. All right. We're moving on. Can I just say one thing to you in the audience? I did say at the beginning of the debate, applause fine. Please don't shout out, because what you do is to drown out the debate here, and people at home can't hear it. So if you could just restrain yourselves, applaud points if you want to, but please don't try and conduct a second debate with the speakers on the panel. We'll go to our next question, which is from Karim Kassal, who is a Leave supporter. Karim.
As a young working class man, I feel at the back of the queue for entry-level jobs, housing and public services. How many people each year can the UK reasonably cope with?
Francis O'Grady, your turn to start.
Well, there is no doubt that we need to manage migration better. And you're right, Karim, there should be more opportunities, there should be more jobs, and not just more jobs, better jobs. But I have to say, I get fed up migrants always getting the blame for something that politicians in Westminster ought to be doing something about. Because it seems to me that, 0 hours, I want to tackle 0 hours, and I suspect everybody else in this hall does too. Westminster can do something about that. When it comes to paying a decent wage, that's Westminster's job. And we really should be investing in more new homes, in better public services where we have pressures on communities, our schools and hospitals. Well, instead of cuts, we need investment. But finally, I've got to say, why I get fed up with migrants being blamed is, where did all this start? The big pressure on our pay and jobs wasn't to do with low-paid migrant workers. Right. It was those greedy bankers crashing the economy.
All right, Francis.
And if we leave, we'll crash it again.
All right, let's try within reason to stick to the points that we've been asked to raise. Karim raised the point: how many people each year can the UK reasonably cope with? Gisela.
And that is the heart of the matter, the point you've just raised. Yeah. Because any government with the best will of the world, when it has to plan its public services, whether it's schools, whether it's the NHS, when it's training how many nurses and doctors we need, housing, to get on the housing ladder, all those things are impossible with the best will of the world if you have got uncontrolled numbers coming in. And an Australian type point system allows you to adjust things. Australia happens to want to have more immigration because it's a large country, but you can reduce it. And the one thing which I find really extraordinary is that uncontrolled immigration has also allowed big companies not to do the kind of training of our workers they ought to be doing because they're able to recruit cheap from the rest of Europe.
All right. And Ruth, Karim's question was, his preface was, he feels at the back of the queue for entry-level jobs, housing and public services. How many people can the UK cope with?
Well, I think we do need to bring down migration. I also think we need to be looking at the sort of skills that we want to bring here. It used to be the case that you could come from the EU to this country and take out the day that you arrived. And that's stopping. You will now have to pay in for 4 years before you can take out full benefits. If you don't find a job within the first 6 months, you can be asked to leave. But I don't think that we should discount, and Gisela talks about public services and schools and hospitals, you can discount the contribution that EU migrants make. 110,000 in the NHS and social care, 150,000 in schools across England and Wales. But my big issue is this. You don't fund schools and hospitals and you don't control immigration by crashing the economy. And that's what leaving the EU would do.
Andrea?
That is just simply not the case. If we vote leave and take back control this Thursday, we will have a £10 billion a year independence dividend that we will be able to spend on our priorities. Now, the Bank of England has been very clear in its report that uncontrolled immigration has had downward pressure on wages in this country. There are people who simply haven't had a pay rise for years. And not only that, but every family in this country knows how difficult it is to get the primary school place of your choice, to get a doctor's appointment, and yes, to afford rents, or to get onto the housing ladder. These are the really legitimate concerns, and the way to get over that is by voting leave and taking back control this Thursday.
Andrea.
I've got to come back on some of this.
Immigration is a concern to a lot of people, but leaving the EU isn't the answer.
Yes, it is.
Because look, but it's not. How is it? How is it having more control if you have less money in your pocket, as Martin Lewis, the money expert, says? How is it having more control if we have a recession, as the Bank of England and IFS say? How is it having more control if we're not invested in the schools and the hospitals and the GP practices? How is it having more control if Karim can't get a job because local employers are suffering? How is it more control if there's double the immigration, as there would be under Australian point system? How is it having more control if there are businesses from China, India, America choosing Germany and France over London? How is it having more control if there are young people stifled the opportunity that we had?
Hang on a second. I think, Boris, it's your turn.
Let me say directly to Sadiq Khan that I think there's actually a lot of agreement around this panel.
Join outside. You were outside.
And they should come over to our side, because everything I've heard tonight is their admission that something is wrong with our immigration system. There's only one way to fix it, and that is to take back control. And day after day in the last week, we've seen senior figures in the Labour Party. I think Jeremy Corbyn this morning, he's the leader, said that there was no way of controlling immigration as long as we're in the EU. Tom Watson, Harriet Harman, they're all finally accepting that the deal that was done did absolutely nothing to restore control of our immigration system to this country. And there is only one way to achieve that. There is only one way to achieve that, and that is to vote leave and take back control and put in the Australian-style points-based system that makes sure that we get the people, that we need to help our business, our NHS, but do not depress wages.
Rich to listen to you, Boris. I find it a little bit rich to hear people saying they're worried about wages when your government has imposed a pay cap on 6 million public servants year after year after year after year. But can I also say, because Karen's question was about numbers. And I think the Leave campaign is selling people a big con, because you're not promising to reduce numbers. You have never promised to reduce numbers. And you're pretending that you are going to reduce numbers. It's a big con. Don't believe them. This is a one-way ticket. If we're out, we're out. And we will pay with our jobs and our wages if we go.
Hang on. So
they won't pay.
Look, this whole
So
debate.
the accusation is that you've never promised on the Leave campaign to reduce numbers. Is that true?
What an Australian point system would allow you is actually decide what the numbers are. At the moment, you can't. But can I just make another point? This debate today actually isn't about...
Sorry, can you answer her point?
No.
Did you promise ever? Did you? Has the Leave campaign ever promised to reduce numbers?
What we said is you take back control and you can decide. No, but hold on, let me finish that point. What we have not done is what the Prime Minister has done, and actually promised that he would reduce it to the tens of thousands, even though he knew he couldn't do it.
You haven't promised.
And this is not about the six of us here on this podium and the debate. This is about my children's future, your children's future, our grandchildren's future. And I think unless we take back control over something as important as that, we won't be able to provide the public services they deserve.
Ruth Davidson.
I do just have to remind people at home, in case they're mistaken, that there are actually mums and dads and grands and granddads on this side of the argument as well. The immigration issue is a complex one that needs a proper grown-up argument. We're not having it tonight. We certainly haven't had it throughout this campaign. Britain deserves better than people that say they've got a quick fix but won't tell you what it actually means for Britain. We need a much bigger conversation than this.
Andrea?
Well, that just is completely nonsense. You know, this country will do incredibly well if we take back control and vote Leave. What we will be able to do is to manage the numbers of people who are coming to this country so that we can be fair to those who come here and fair to those who already live here. What we've had for a number of years now is a situation where people's pay is down, where the skills training is down, where there's pressure on all of our public services, including school places, doctors' places, and the housing market. And the only way we will ever get that back under control is if we vote Leave on this Thursday.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll take a brief pause again and go to the other side of the hall and hear again from Michelle and her guests. Michelle.
David, immigration has been an important part of this debate for the Leave side. So let me start our discussion of it with the Remain side and with Caroline Lucas, Green Party MP. How would you address the real concerns that people have about the impact of migration on housing, on school places, on health?
Well, it's exactly about the real concerns. The real concerns is about pressure, but that's not caused by immigration. That is caused by successive governments' failure to invest in those services. We have heard that you are far more likely to find someone from another EU country actually treating you in the NHS rather than being in the queue ahead of you.
The population is projected to increase, and migration is going to be a large part of that.
Migration goes two ways. We've also got the freedom to live and learn and study and work in 27 other countries ourselves. What an amazing gift is that? And when you consider that people coming to our country are bringing with them not only benefits to our society and our culture, but also to our economy, let us ring fence the money they are bringing with them and paying into our tax system and use that to build leisure centres and libraries in those places under pressure so everybody can benefit. There's a two-way street here.
I want to get a thought from Humza Yousaf of the SNP, Scottish Government Minister. Your party's rare in British politics. It has campaigned for more immigration.
Look, I don't care if it's unpopular. Let's just stick with the facts. Migrants contribute more than they take out of the system. And let me just say this much. I have been so utterly depressed at the state of the debate around immigration, and the worst of that we saw last week when Nigel Farage unveiled a poster that, I'm going to say it, was xenophobic and frankly bordering on racist. And Diane James from UKIP here should hang her head in shame, and she should apologise to the British people for lowering this debate into the worst type of debate I think we've ever had here. So look, migrants contribute. They contribute to our public services, they contribute to our economy, they even contribute to our cuisine.
Okay,
And thank God for
you
it.
mentioned Diane James. Let me turn to her now. Hang your head in shame over the poster.
Nigel Farage has apologised, but let's put a reality check, please. That photograph
Are you ashamed of the poster?
went up on social media the minute the MP was murdered. It was taken down. That picture, and pictures exactly the same, appeared in the media well before, in the early part of this year, highlighting what is completely wrong with the Schengen system, what is completely wrong with the EU fundamental tenet of freedom of movement of people.
I want to turn to Tony Parsons. Is immigration part of why you want to leave the EU?
It's definitely part of it. I mean, I personally have nothing against migrants. I like them so much. I married one. So I think it's a bit rich that the Remain side are so devoid of any arguments that they have to smear us as racists and bigots because we're not. Because we love our country. We love our country. And I have not heard one argument about how if we're too timid, if we're too frightened, if we're too small to leave this rotting carbuncle of the European Union, how do we accommodate a third of a million people?
Are you comfortable sharing a platform with UKIP, which unveiled that poster last week?
I think there's been a broad range of opinions. Well, you can laugh all you like, but you're so desperate because you have no answers about how we build a city the size of Wolverhampton every year.
All right, thank you, Tony Parsons.
Answer it.
Thank you. I want to turn back to the Remain side, and I want to turn to Justin King and then to Sarah Wollaston. Your business, the business you used to run, Sainsbury's, could just employ more British workers if we said goodbye to freedom of movement?
And they do, Sainsbury's and many other businesses. There are more people born in the UK, in work in the UK today, than at any time in our history. That is a fact. There are more people in employment in total in this country than at any time in the history. That's part of our economic success. And over 80% of migrants are in work, net, as we've heard, time and time again, contributing to our economy. That's a really powerful part of our economic success.
Sarah Wollaston, answer the point there about how we can cope with the population increase. You care about the NHS, you're a former GP. How could it cope?
The point is, it's shameful to blame migrants for queues in the NHS. The queues will get longer if we leave the EU on this Thursday. Absolutely make no mistake, because there'll be less money to fund the NHS and there will be fewer workers able to move here freely to work. And there's another point I'd like to make. I have heard from NHS staff who have told me that they now feel unwelcome in this country. What a disgraceful situation. And I want to say thank you to all those people working in our NHS. Please stay. We want you to stay.
Sarah Wollaston there. We'll hear from this panel once more before the end of the programme. David.
We will indeed, Michelle, on this last section. Now, we have so far this evening talked about the referendum outcome, how it would affect the economy and immigration. Our final half hour, we're going to debate the big issues of democracy, security, and Britain's place in the world. And just before we do, a reminder of how our relationship with the EU has developed over the years.
The EU began in 1951 as the European Coal and Steel Community, which had 6 members. The idea was to create an economic area to bring European nations closer together in the wake of World War II. In 1973, the UK joined what had by then become the European Economic Community. And in 1975, the British people voted for the first time on the UK's membership, deciding to remain part of the EEC or Common Market. In 1993, the Treaty on European Union was signed in Maastricht. It was widely regarded as a step change for the European project because it legally established the EU as a political as well as an economic union. It also laid the foundations for the introduction of a single currency, which Britain chose not to adopt. In 2004, more countries joined the EU. It now has 28 members, and there is the prospect of new nations joining if they meet the criteria for entry. But current EU states have a veto over any new members. Senior EU leaders are talking about the creation of a European army and a new European intelligence agency. Leave campaigners say the EU has embarked on a relentless journey to create a European superstate. But Remain supporters say Britain can opt out of future integration. The choice at this referendum is to decide which path is best for Britain, to remain or to leave.
Thank you. So, our first question in this section is from Douglas Warren, and he's a Leave supporter. Douglas.
Thank you, David. 40 years ago, the UK voted to join a common market. If we vote to remain on Thursday, how can we be sure that in another 40 years we won't find ourselves in the United States of Europe?
Sadiq Khan, you start off on this one.
You know, Britain is a sovereign, independent country, just like Germany, just like France. We retain control over our defence, over the pound, over interest rates, over what we do in our schools, our hospitals, our public transport. We chose to join the EU, and we're having a referendum so we can decide whether to remain or leave. But let me tell you why I think it's important to choose to remain. Because if we choose to remain, it means we're a member of a single market of 500 million customers. We can do free trade with one set of rules that we help make. And I'll tell you this, if you're living in France, you don't think you're any less French because you're a member of the EU. If you live in Germany, you don't think you're less German because you're a member of the EU. And we should think we're less British because we're in the EU.
Gisela.
I just don't accept that there is a trade-off between trade and democracy. I think democracy is enormously important. And what we've got now is an institution that has utterly outgrown its historic roots, which were noble, has now become so cumbersome, and the real big difference was the introduction of the euro. That means you've got a failing currency, which is producing 50% youth unemployment in Greece. They have to sort out their problems, and the best way for us is actually trade with the world, don't be this inward-looking bloc, and above all, you take back control over all the decisions you've made, because in 1 and 28 and another 5 countries joining, we will become increasingly insignificant in making the decisions. So let's take back control.
I'll just repeat. Ruth, I'll just repeat Douglas's question, if I may, which is how can we be sure in another 40 years we won't find ourselves in the United States of Europe?
Because it's up to us. You saw in the films that we as a country are not in the euro. We as a country are not in Schengen. We as a country have vetoes over things like the expansion and other states joining us. What I'd say to Gisela is, I don't think you take control by leaving the EU. I think you lose control by losing your seat at the table, by letting other countries whack taxes on us. I think you lose control by hurting our economy, by hurting goods, by hurting services. We at the moment make the EU work for us. We are in charge of the pound, interest rates, taxes, healthcare, education, spending. We make these decisions in the House of Commons or in the Scottish Parliament. Europe doesn't tell us what to do. We make those decisions. We make those decisions.
Andrea?
We make decisions over when and if our soldiers go to war. We make these decisions. We also, because we're part of the biggest free trading bloc in the UK, have the highest number of Brits in employment in Britain in our nation's history, and that's what we would lose if we left.
Andrea?
That really is an extraordinary claim. You know, the truth is that 60% of our rules and regulations come from the European Union.
A lie.
As City Minister, and now as Energy Minister, all day long, I'm told you can't do that, you can't do this because of the EU. The truth is, there are 5 presidents of the EU. Now, can anyone name them? And did anyone vote for them? No, you didn't vote for them because you're not allowed to vote for them. And you can't kick them out either. And the problem is that in the EU, there are 10,000 officials, that's nearly twice the number of people in this room, by the way, who earn more than the UK Prime Minister. And you're paying for them. And that gravy train is continuing. So we, Britain, have voted against Europe 70 times. And 70 times we have been outvoted. So how does that mean we have any influence in Europe?
Right.
Well, I think we've already heard Britain is a sovereign state and we should be proud of that, and we do control our taxes, our public spending, all these other decisions that sometimes Westminster politicians like to blame on Brussels. We do make those decisions, but where you have a fantastic market that gives you real bargaining power in the global economy of 500 million people on which 3 million jobs depend, then of course you should have fair rules that everybody has to play by. And again, I keep hearing about regulation. These are our rights. You know, this is about treating workers fairly. We should be proud of that. And I'll be honest with you, I'm proud of being British, but there is nothing patriotic about a lack of a plan as to what even would happen if we came out. There's nothing patriotic about putting people's jobs at risk.
Let me tell you, there are, I think we've heard enough. I think we've heard enough from Project Fear over the last couple of weeks. I really do. And I'll give you one statistic. They go on and on about the single market. Let me tell you, since the dawn of the single market, which I remember reporting, actually there have been, I think, since 1992 it began, January 1993, there have been 27 other countries, not in the European Union, that have done better than the United Kingdom at exporting goods into the single market. There have been 21 countries that have done better at exporting services. They include most of the growth economies in the world, including India, China, and America. The best place for us is to be out of this morass, this supreme legal system. And I'm afraid Sadiq Khan is completely wrong. The European Court of Justice is the supreme legal authority in our country, from which, and he knows that because he's a lawyer, and he would not deny that. He would deny it. He would not deny it. There is the European Court of Justice, and it is acquiring steadily more powers. And under the Lisbon Treaty, the EU expanded competences by about 45 new areas of competence. And you're now seeing the European Court of Justice,
the United States of Europe,
adjudicating in home affairs matters, in the deportation of terrorist suspects, divorce law, for heaven's sake, things that have nothing to do with the single market or the idea
and the United States of Europe.
And
sorry, Boris,
as for the proposals,
I've got to leave you because you've gone on quite a bit.
Sorry.
A United States of Europe in 40 years, yes or no?
I think, remember what John Major said about the single currency. He said it had all the quaintness and all the implausibility of a rain dance. And look where it is now, destroying jobs across the European Union. Let's get out of this thing, and we'll do better on it. We'll do better striking free trade deals on our own. Vote leave and take back control.
Ruth.
So that's a no then. Even Boris Johnson doesn't think there's going to be a United States of Europe in 40 years' time.
There will be.
But I need to pick up something that Andrea said. I think I need to pick up on something Andrea said, because I can't let it stand that you tell a blatant untruth in the middle of a debate 2 days before we vote. She said 60% of our laws are made in Europe, and it's simply not true. 13% of our laws, according to the Independent House of Commons Library, that number is 13%. In the last 5-year Parliament, it was 4. There was 4 bills out of 121 that came out of Europe. And I think that there's a real question here, that you're being asked to make a decision that's irreversible, we can't change it, we wake up on Friday, we don't like it, and we're being sold it on a lie, because they lied about the costs of Europe, they lied about Turkey's entrance to Europe, they lied about the European army, because we've got a veto over that. They put these in their leaflets, and they've lied about this here tonight too, and it's not good enough. You deserve the truth. You deserve the truth.
You do deserve the truth. And if the Prime Minister is refusing to say that he would exercise his veto over Turkey, what do you think he's going to veto? And let's just be clear about the United States of Europe, which Douglas addresses. Those countries in the Eurozone will have to integrate more deeply. And in a sense, we have already left, because they have to do things in their own interest and we are purely peripheral. So the best thing to do is actually come back and take control. And the other thing, by the way, there are a number of things out there which the European Commission is kind of holding back until after this referendum. A tax identification number, a European-wide tax identification number. We have not vetoed that. Why do you think that's going to happen?
Well, can I just say quite... Can I say very proudly that I choose to work with the EU to fight climate change. I choose to work with the EU to fix air quality. I choose to work with the EU to deal with the refugee crisis. I choose to work with the EU to fight terrorism and organised crime. I choose to work with the EU to fight tax evasion. Let me tell you what else. One of the most important jobs I have as the Mayor of London is to keep our city safe. And in July 2005, our city was under attack. On the 7th of July, the terrorists were successful. 52 Londoners died. On the 21st of July, they weren't. All the men were arrested except for one. He fled our country and went to Italy. Before the European arrest warrant, he would have been there for years and years and years, like Costa del Sol. What happened? He fled here in July, he was brought back in September, he's now serving 40 years in prison for terrorism, justice delivered by the European Union.
You can do that in the government. Yeah. You can do all that.
All right, our second question tonight, and indeed our final question from the floor here, comes from Alex Trembath. And Alex Trembath is supporting the Remain side. Alex, can we have your question, please?
Is it a coincidence that the longest period of peace in European history has happened at the same time as the emergence of the European Union?
Gisela Stewart.
The post-World War II deal was twofold. The common market was supposed to provide economic stability. NATO was supposed to provide military stability. What we've got now is that the European Union is not keeping up with the deal. It is creating unemployment in Greece. It is outsourcing its border control to Turkey. It is undermining NATO by trying to duplicate the same structures. And just to quote the former head of Interpol, Ronald Noble, he said, "The EU border system is like hanging a sign welcoming terrorists to Europe. It is making us insecure rather than making us securer."
Right. Ruth?
Yeah. Alex, the short answer is no, there is no coincidence that we've been more or less at peace. The other side have said throughout this debate that they don't like experts, but when it comes to keeping our country safe and secure, I want to listen to the experts. So when the head of GCHQ says we're safer in the EU, I listen. When 5 former NATO chiefs say we're safer in the EU, I listen. When the head of Europol, who's a Brit, says we're safer in the EU, I listen. When the head of MI5 and MI6 says we're safer in the EU, I listen. And when all of our major allies, America, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, say we're safer in the EU, I listen. And if it comes to a choice to listening to all of these people, even if they're experts, or listening to these 3 about who keeps my family safe, I'm going to vote for them every single day of the week and twice on a Sunday. Right. Don't risk it.
Andrea.
Well, let's be clear about this. The UK has always benefited from being a founder member of NATO. We have one of the few permanent seats on the UN Security Council. We're one of the Five Eyes for intelligence. That means that we share intelligence across the world with other English-speaking nations. Of course, we cooperate with the European Union, and we will continue to do so. But Field Marshal Lord Guthrie, Chief of General Staff, General Sir Mike Rose, Commander of UN forces in Bosnia, Major General Julian Thompson, Royal Marine Commander in the Falklands, those people say that the UK security rests on NATO cooperation, not on the EU. Lord Guthrie says many European politicians like to say that it was the EU that made everything peaceful. It was not. It was the leadership of the Americans.
All right, Francis.
I want to return to Alex's question because this isn't just about history. I want to bring it closer to home. Many trade unionists and other campaigners in Britain and Ireland worked together for many years to support the peace process in Northern Ireland, and it took a lot of hard work. And we've supported the Good Friday Agreement ever since. And the wonderful thing is that people can come from different traditions, come from different communities, but they see themselves as common citizens of the EU. Now, the Irish Prime Minister has said that if we come out of the EU, there will have to be border controls. And let me tell you, the way that's seen in Belfast and Derry, I really worry for our future. This is not the time to be building, we should be building bridges between people, not walls. And for the sake of the Irish, vote to stay in.
All right. Boris.
I believe, alas, that the EU is going in totally the wrong direction, and I think it is a great mistake for it to try to take on this defence component and to try to evolve into a United States of Europe in the way that it is. And I remember vividly when the EU was given the task of trying to sort out the tragedy in the Balkans. You'll remember what was happening in Bosnia, and the EU was mandated specifically for 4 years. The EU was given that diplomatic and indeed military task. It was a disaster. About 1 million people died. And it was only solved when the Americans came in. I was there. I remember reporting it. And we saw what happened when the Dayton Accords and NATO finally asserted primacy. That was the right thing. And I do worry about our security on the streets of this city, to get back to a point that was made earlier. And I think it absolutely extraordinary that the European Court of Justice, not the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, but the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, is telling our Home Secretary that she may not deport people with serious criminal convictions to other European countries, or indeed people who have been arrested for serious terrorist offences, such as Abu Hamza's daughter-in-law. I think it absolutely amazing, and how the Remain side have the cheek to come and tell us that we improve our security by staying in this organisation. I do not understand.
Right.
The best way forward is to European arrest warrant.
Andrea and Boris.
Intergovernmentally. Thank you.
Andrea and Boris rightly talked about our allies, talked about us being in NATO. But it's not a choice between the EU and NATO, or the EU and our allies. We can still have a special relationship with the USA and be in the EU. And tell me this, any one of you, which one of our allies, USA, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, which one of the NATO members is encouraging us to leave the EU, or says it's in our interest? Name one. Just one.
Name us one.
USA, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, one of the NATO countries. In fact, all of them are saying we're safer together.
And all of them are also saying that as long as the European Union keeps trying to copy what NATO does, if the countries across Europe are not paying their 2% of the GDP, which is the NATO contribution, we will be weakening it.
But stay and fight, don't quit. Let's stay and persuade our allies to pay their 2%. Why are you a quitter? We're better than that. We can do it.
Sadiq, we heard earlier that the Prime Minister was meant to have got a deal. That a deal amounted to absolutely nothing. It's temporary. So when you have had the most serious renegotiation attempts by a British Prime Minister, certainly since I've been in politics, and the best he got out was nothing. How do you think you're going to change it after you voted Remain?
Yeah.
There's a danger in remaining. Vote Leave.
Yes, good.
We leave it one way.
I think Boris maybe misjudged this panel by talking about the Balkans, because what he probably doesn't know is I was sent to the Balkans at the end of the Kosovo War as a reporter, and I've never been more proud of being British in my life than watching British troops with a Union Jack on their arm who believed in something, pulling their weight and helping in the European Union. It's what caused me to join up and serve. So I think I'm the only one on this panel that's ever worn the Queen's uniform. And while I have the greatest of respect for the retired General Lord Guthrie, I have the greatest of respect for him. And with the greatest of respect for him, I would gently remind the other side of this debate that as a retired general, he's not currently charged with the safety and security of our nation. And all of those people who are currently charged, every single one of them, and every single one of our major allies says we are safer within the European Union.
Andrea?
Let's get back to the really important question about the UK's place in the world. And let's get back to that 5 presidents report. The 5 presidents of the European Union.
That's not what Alex asked.
Whose president's report just last year is saying that by 2025 they want to see complete political and fiscal union of all 28 EU member states. So we have this one last chance to keep our democracy, to make sure that in future, when you want to sack a government, you can sack it and you know that it will go, that you won't find the very next government that you appoint is still stuck doing the bidding of the European Union. And let's be clear, those measures that those 5 presidents want to impose on us do include a European tax identification code, and they do include a European army. Let's be clear, the best way to be in charge of our own democracy is by voting Leave this Thursday.
Sadiq. All right, Sadiq, briefly, if you would.
The other side know this. They've lost the debate on the economy. There are no experts.
Just won the debate on the economy.
There are no experts backing up their case. So it's lies and scaremongering. And you want the British public to take a one-way leap in the dark without a plan. You know we can veto those plans. You know the deal we've got. We can veto any plans for us to integrate with the rest of the EU.
Rubbish.
You know the rights we've got. But all you want to do is talk us down, and you should know better.
All right. No. We have to pause there. We have to pause there. And now for one, we return to Michelle for one last time with her guests. Michelle.
David, this vote is not about today or tomorrow, but about a choice that will matter for many years to come. So let's turn to the panel to find out what sort of Britain they would like to see. Diane James of UKIP, is your Britain a diminished one? President Obama says the EU magnifies our influence.
Well, I'm not particularly interested in what President Obama's got to say, because he won't be a president of the United States in a few months' time. I'd be more interested in what the 2 contenders for that role would be. But as for the Remain camp, talking about trashing the economy, what about the 259 billion black hole, the 34 billion the United Kingdom has got to pick up, and every single time the EU mismanages the contributions from the member states, the United Kingdom has to pick up an element of bill. Now, I want that 34 billion back spent in the United Kingdom. I don't want to keep on funding the European Union, which has effectively become a failed state.
I'm going to turn to Tim Farron, leader of the Liberal Democrats. You have spoken about being passionate about EU membership, passionate about an expanding EU, an EU army, the path to a super-state.
I'm passionate about the fact that we are sat around a table with 27 countries, 11 of which, a quarter of a century ago, were on the other side of the Iron Curtain. Six of which had nuclear weapons on their soil pointed right here. Today, they are our friends and our neighbours. We put that at risk at our peril. This is a vote about what kind of country we are. Are we an outward-looking, decent, embracing, tolerant country, confident of our place in the world, or are we insular? Are we small? Are we glowering across the white cliffs of Dover? Something that is un-British. I'm voting in because I'm a patriot.
Right. Back to the Leave side of the argument. Tony Parsons, small, insular?
Like Tim, I'm a patriot, and I respect him and I respect his opinion. I do think that we, in this country, we are the oldest parliamentary democracy in the world. I personally think we live in the greatest country in the world. I would love us to be a 21st century, outward-looking internet. We're having this debate tonight with all these lovely people in the capital of the world, London. But I think we need to set ourselves free. And this is where Tim and I disagree, because I honestly believe we need to set ourselves free from this rotting, corrupt, bureaucratic institution full of men, and they are mostly men who care nothing for
Hassan
us.
Radkour, you spoke earlier about what British women had achieved. Why would we achieve more outside the EU?
Well, David Cameron was given the pure opportunity to actually reform and use our influence within the European Union to reform the European Union. He asked for nothing, and you know what? He got nothing back. The European Union doesn't listen to us. It doesn't have our best interest at heart. So voting Leave means we can become the citizen of the world, and we can actually say, you know what, European Union is a sick man of the economy.
Just before I go back to the Remain side, Priti Patel, you heard that long list of figures, of experts, although that's kind of dismissive word at the moment, that Ruth Davidson had, all those people who believe that we are safer in. Shouldn't you be listening to them?
Well, I take the view, and I've said this and I'll say it again, that Britain will prosper, be stronger and more secure outside of the European Union for all the reasons that we've heard from Gisela, Andrea and Boris this evening, because we can take back control from the unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats and the institutions in Brussels that quite frankly do nothing to represent Britain. They take our money, they spend our money, they don't account for themselves fiscally, and at the same time they are having a corrosive influence when it comes to decision making on our laws. Our parliament should be sovereign, and we should be accountable to the British public. We should be able to say no to Brussels.
Okay, thank you. Caroline Lucas, the EU is on a path to future integration. Why should we be a part of it?
The EU is the biggest peace project that we've ever had in history. It is extraordinary that 28 countries have come together to try to solve their problems through debate and discussion rather than bullets and bombs. It wasn't that long ago since that was the way in which problems were tried to be solved here. It's been the EU that has helped to bring peace to Western Europe. It's helped to bring democracy to Eastern Europe. We turn our back on that at our peril. The biggest challenges we face today are by their very nature cross-border, whether that's climate change, international terrorism, the refugee crisis, and we have to work cross-border in order to be able to solve those problems. That is about taking back control. That is why we should vote Remain.
Thank you, Caroline Lucas. Thank you to everyone on this panel, and the hashtag for it to continue the discussion is BBC Debate.
Michelle, thank you very much. Well, we began with brief opening statements. We end with concluding statements. The other way round. Ruth Davidson, first of all, for Remain. Ruth.
Tonight was the Leave campaign's last chance to answer your questions, to spell out exactly what happens if we abandon the biggest single market in the world, to show us what a Brexit Britain would actually look like. And I don't know about you, but I don't think I heard enough to be confident that they have all of the answers that you need. And you have to be 100% sure, because there's no going back on Friday morning and your decision could cost someone else their job. Now, I know that the EU isn't perfect, but the benefits far outweigh any costs. And the Britain that I know, the Britain that I love, works with its friends and neighbours. It doesn't walk away from them. Sadiq, Francis and I, we refuse to dismiss the experts. We listen to them. And the economists, the scientists, the business leaders, the trade unions, the health professionals, they all agree that Britain is better off in. You are better off in. There is nothing more positive than having a stronger economy, supporting jobs and opportunities. And that's why I believe you should vote Remain. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruth. And now Boris Johnson.
At the end of this campaign, I think you'll agree there is a very clear choice between those on their side who speak of nothing but fear of the consequences of leaving the EU, and we on our side who offer hope. Between those who have been endlessly rubbishing our country and running it down, and those of us who believe in Britain. They say we can't do it. We say we can. They say we have no choice but to bow down to Brussels. We say they are woefully underestimating this country and what it can do. If we vote Leave, we can take back control of our borders, of huge sums of money, £10 billion a year net, of our tax-raising powers, of our trade policy, and of our whole law-making system, the democracy that is the foundation of our prosperity. And if we stand up for democracy, we will be speaking up for hundreds of millions of people around Europe who agree with us, but who currently have no voice. And if we vote Leave and take back control, I believe that this Thursday can be our country's Independence Day.
Thank you. That brings the debate to an end. My hope is that it's clarified some of the issues, not only for you here, but for people at home. I'd first of all like to thank all of you who came here to Wembley to listen to the arguments, very much for listening I was going to say quietly, I wouldn't say quietly, for listening so keenly and enthusiastically to the arguments. And I'd like to thank all our speakers, those who are up there with Michelle, and those up here on stage with me. Thank you all very much indeed. Now, it's